Hi, good evening, comrades. It's really good to be able to talk to you tonight, even though I can't be down there with you. I'd love to be. But as I say, we live in really quite extraordinary times. The events that are taking place in Lebanon, the October Revolution, as people are calling it now, are really quite extraordinary. I mean, this is something that really should never have happened. And I was chatting with one of the comrades over the phone a couple of days ago, and we were remembering how when we first met 20 years ago, we spoke about the possibility of a revolution taking place in 20 years' time. And we were laughing because we were saying, it's 20 years later. But at that time, we meant that it's a lifetime away. That is something that we probably will never experience. 20 years is a long, long time then. When you're younger anyway, it feels much longer. And what is it we're seeing? We're seeing a country which is heavily sectarianized, in which a system is there to guarantee that people are kept apart. It is a system there that encourages the rhetoric of sectarian hatred, that isn't afraid of using violence, armed thugs, army when they can get away with it, police when they have to kind of keep people in place. And what's taking place, what's happening now, for I think many Lebanese of my generation, is really something completely extraordinary. Protests are taking place in neighborhoods, joint protests taking place in neighborhoods that were mortal enemies for 30 years. We're seeing mass reconciliations taking place, especially in the more outlying areas, which are kind of riddled with, sectarian division. We're seeing mass protests in Tripoli, not Tripoli, Libya, Tripoli in northern Lebanon, which has been so heavily suppressed since the early 1980s, dominated by Islamist organizations, and is often spoken about as just being a new IS base, ISIS base. And they're having what can only be described as a huge party, extraordinary levels of freedom, rebellion that has spread to lots of other areas, irrespective of how we used to define them. We used to define this as Sunni or Shia or them, and now we don't even think about that anymore. That's how extraordinary this is. A couple of things about it. One is that in order for there to be a change, in a real change in Lebanese society that is overturning a sectarian system imposed since the era of colonialism, since the 1920s and 1930s. In order to do this, we have to understand that sectarianism wasn't simply an aberration. It wasn't a kickback to sort of pre-capitalist period, kind of ancient hatreds turned to new mutinies and all that kind of stuff, but very much something that's integral part of how Lebanese capitalism developed and how Lebanese capitalists maintain their control over society. Sectarianism it's not simply a system of clientelism where you really have to go to your, you have to go, you have to stay within your own denomination. For example, to get married, people have to leave the country if they want to marry someone from another religion or another sect, and so on. It goes all the way through every kind of aspect of the way we live, from neighborhoods down to your chances of getting a passport and so on. And what we're seeing is really all of that gone in people's minds. In people's minds, this is all gone. In reality, of course, it still remains. And these are very early days of the revolution. But what it has shown is that thing we said 20 years ago, that only revolution can destroy sectarianism, is now the common view. It's no longer simply a few dreamers. And I think that's really extraordinary. And I'll pay tribute, actually, to the comrades on the ground. Many of the videos I'm seeing coming from Beirut, I'm seeing people I know, people who'd been over for conferences, Marxism, for example, here, people we worked with over the years, over Iraq, over the anti-war when they were younger and so on. You see them all now leading these protests. The other really important aspect of it is the kind of legacy, if you like, of attempting to build a revolutionary tradition over the last 20 years inside of Lebanon, is that there is almost an instinctive desire now amongst the more the kind of better organized sections of the left, that we have to drive this into the working class. That in order for this phase of the revolution to work, we need the workers on board. This was always really hard. Lebanese working class is really actually quite really operates in small factories, small workshops, offices, and so on. There's no Lebanon October. There's no industry with 30 or 40,000 people. It's all very small. So to get it into the working class and to get the working class engaged in this battle, not simply just students and so on, important as they are, has been, I think, the driving force from what I can see from many of our friends and comrades on the ground, and with some success, because we know that really the only force capable of driving this revolution through to its actual victory is the organised masses of the working class. And if we talk about the organised masses of the working class inside of Lebanon, then we have to talk about every single denomination, community, religious sect, and so on. All of them are massively divided by class, and it's just a question of our side, our class, beginning to formulate and come together. And what we're seeing is really quite extraordinary. There's a second element to it, which I think is really important, which is that this is happening all in the shadow of Iraq. And for me, what's happening in Iraq is even more extraordinary, if that's possible to say. The mass protests that are taking place, the mass uprisings that are taking place there are against every element of the regime, including Iran. This is very important, and you see this in lots of the demonstrations. They're very mixed. There are a lot of women who now no longer wear the veil, who are on demonstrations, and it feels completely normal and completely natural. So this is quite extraordinary. Again, this is mass demonstrations. What are people chanting? Shia and Sunni are one. The enemy are the bosses, and so on. So this is an extraordinary turn of event. Both of these are taking place, especially in Lebanon. Both Lebanon and Iraq, a very crucial element is what's happening with climate change. And that I think is something we have to consider now forever when we're talking about struggles. First of all, 2 days, was it 2 or 3 days before the revolution, the October Revolution begins, in Lebanon, there are extraordinary wildfires. The spike in temperature really unknown for that time of year. That set fire to cedar woods, to the pine forest, to villages and houses. And what emerged out of that was that the government had stolen the money for the fire engines and the firefighting aircraft and so on. In that moment, it exposed the corruption of the system, the corruption of the world, the state of the world, the state we're in, and the response, even though the trigger was a small tax rise on a telephone call, it is the straw that broke the camel's back, in which the camel's has a huge amount on his back already. So this is how we have to see it. And in Iraq, they've had really extraordinarily bad summers, reaching 52, 53 degrees, beyond the ability of humans to exist in any kind of real way. And what they found were the people with money could have the air conditioning, and the people without money were dying in the streets in their homes and so on. And this is where the process began in Iraq with the summer heat wave last summer. And it's developed, and the same in Lebanon. It's developed, and it's part of a wider explosion of uprisings and unrest that I think is now beginning, really being to take our breath away, and beginning to see the potential of what's going to take place. I think what's going to take place over the next few years, which is more of these. There's a couple of things I want to say about them. One is extraordinary numbers of people involved. In Lebanon, we're talking about 1 in 4 of the population. I don't know what it is in Iraq, but huge numbers of the population. You see the protests from Chile or Ecuador or even Barcelona, and you just see the huge, overwhelming numbers of people. So that's a really crucial element. And it's such a crucial element in Lebanon, because it is a small country, is that when they try to bring in the soldiers, every soldier is probably going to be related to 10 people on the roadblock. And we're seeing soldiers bursting into tears because they meet their parents. We're seeing attempts by soldiers under orders to clear a blockade, some of them punching up the demonstrators, and some other the soldiers trying to pull back or hold back or punch up the soldiers who were pumping the demonstrators. You feel that the whole grip of the regime and the regimes on the population has now become very, very fragile. But as Bassem Ship, who's not with us anymore, but a really key sort of Lebanese Marxist, a socialist now, and a friend of ours, and he said, the thing is the ruling class is not going to throw itself off the abyss. We're not going to scare them. We're not going to go boo and they're going to jump. We're going to have to push them. So this question is now how we push them, and this is the next question that's coming up for Lebanon and for Iraq. And I'd just like to say thank you very much, and please enjoy your evening.